On a warm spring evening, the story of Emily and John quietly began. That day they first met at a friend's gathering. Emily wore a blue dress, smiling as she chatted with friends, while John was instantly captivated by her smile. The two quickly found common ground, discussing their interests, work, and dreams, as if everything around them had faded away. As time passed, their feelings for each other intensified. John's sense of humor and gentle nature made Emily feel safe, while her intelligence and independence deeply attracted him. A few months later, they began officially dating. John often took Emily to the movies, music concerts, and even on weekend hikes. Those days were filled with laughter, and Emily often felt as if she were living in a dream. A year later, John proposed to Emily. It was at the very place they had first met, and John had prepared a romantic candlelit dinner. The table was set with all of Emily's favorite dishes, and as John knelt on one knee, ring in hand, he looked at her with hopeful eyes and asked, "Will you marry me?" Overcome with emotion, Emily burst into tears of joy and nodded without hesitation. Soon they walked down the aisle, vowing to love each other forever. In the early days of their marriage, Emily and John's happiness seemed boundless. They rented a cozy apartment in a small town, and despite their busy work schedules, they always found time to enjoy each other's company. A few months later, they welcomed a new member into their family, a beautiful daughter named Megan. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of joy at her daughter's birth, and John became a devoted father. Every time he held Megan and softly sang lullabies, Emily's heart filled with warmth. As Megan grew, family life was filled with laughter and joy. Emily and John often took their daughter to the park, participated in children's activities, and immersed themselves in the joys of parenthood. Those simple yet fulfilling days created sweet memories for their marriage, making it seem as if everything would remain perfect forever. However, the aura of happiness did not last long. As Megan began to grow older, the conflicts between Emily and John began to surface. Initially, it was just a few trivial matters, such as household expenses and differing parenting styles. But as time went on, these small disagreements gradually accumulated into larger issues. John often worked late, and when he returned home, he was unable to provide enough attention to Emily and their daughter. Emily felt increasingly lonely and exhausted from taking care of Megan. She wished John would spend more time with her and their daughter, but he was always busy with work, unable to meet her expectations. This situation left Emily feeling more and more frustrated, and she began to doubt her own worth. Meanwhile, John felt the pressure, believing that he needed to work harder to provide a better life. Their communication diminished, and arguments became frequent. Both of them were trapped in their own emotions, unable to recognize each other's pain. Finally, after one particularly intense argument, Emily proposed a divorce. Her voice was filled with helplessness and sorrow, while John felt shock and anger. It seemed that everything they once promised to each other had lost its significance. Megan stood nearby, watching her parents argue, her eyes reflecting confusion and anxiety. In the end, Emily and John's marriage came to an end, and the happiness they once shared slipped away quietly amid their disputes and disappointments. After the divorce, Emily felt an unprecedented sense of loneliness and fear. She had thought that marriage was the beginning of happiness, but she never anticipated it would turn into a turning point in her life. This once warm family, as disputes and dissatisfaction continued to accumulate, ultimately became fragmented. Emily's hopes and fears for the future intertwined, leaving her uncertain about which path to take next. After the divorce, Emily felt an unprecedented sense of loneliness and helplessness. Although her relationship with John had ended, their ties were far from severed. Caring for their young daughter, Megan, became the most important responsibility in her life. However, taking care of a child was no easy task, especially as a single parent, and Emily faced numerous challenges she had never encountered before. Megan was still young and often felt anxious about her parents' separation. She would wake up at night seeking comfort from her mother and frequently asked where her father was. Every time Emily saw the confusion and fear in her daughter's eyes, her heart ached. She knew she had to provide Megan with as much love and support as possible to help her feel safe during this chaotic time. However, as a single mother, the financial and emotional pressures weighed heavily on her. To make ends meet, Emily had to work full-time. She worked as an administrative assistant in a small office, with a busy schedule and meager pay. Every day she would wake up early, hurriedly prepare breakfast for Megan, and then rush off to work. After work, she had to quickly return home, cook for her daughter, help her with homework, and soothe her to sleep. It wasn't until late at night, when everything was quiet, that Emily would feel the exhaustion wash over her, with her mind filled with worries about the future. As time passed, a strong protective instinct began to take root in Emily. She started to feel that Megan was not just her daughter, but also her only source of support in life. Emily made the decision to fight for her daughter's custody at all costs. She understood that only by gaining custody could she provide Megan with a stable environment and shield her from any potential negative influence from her father John. Emily's mind was flooded with countless legal terms and procedures regarding custody, and she began to frequently search online for information and even consult with lawyers. The first step in the custody battle was to file a petition with the court. A mix of excitement and anxiety swirled within Emily. In the courtroom, she did her best to express her views, explaining how deeply she cared for Megan's well-being and growth. She told the judge that although life after the divorce was difficult, she would do everything she could to provide a loving home for her daughter. However, John did not back down easily. He also made his own demands, seeking more custody rights. In his eyes, Megan was equally an important part of his life, and he wanted to play a significant role in her upbringing. As the court proceedings continued, the conflict between Emily and John became increasingly evident. John began to appear more frequently in Emily's life, requesting to visit Megan, and even engaging in heated debates with Emily during legal proceedings. The communication between them was filled with animosity, and every face-to-face interaction felt like a battle. Emily felt pushed to the brink, as if all her efforts were becoming insignificant. During one court hearing, Emily was overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears. She recounted the struggles she faced as a single mother, claiming that John had failed to fulfill his responsibilities as a father and was only concerned with his own interests. John countered, asserting that he wanted to be involved in his daughter's life and that his stable job could provide better living conditions for Megan. Their arguments drew the attention of those present, and the atmosphere in the courtroom became tense and serious. Meanwhile, Emily began to realize that the conflict with John was not just about custody anymore. Beneath this struggle lay deeper emotional conflicts and pain. In the hallways outside the courtroom, Emily often felt anxiety and uncertainty. She started to doubt whether she could win this battle. Her hopes for the future gradually transformed into fears about the present, and the weight of her circumstances left her feeling suffocated. Despite this, Emily remained unwilling to give up. For Megan's future, she fought every day, holding on to a glimmer of hope. She believed she could secure a better life for her daughter. Yet, in this long and painful process, Emily increasingly felt that the struggles after divorce were not just a fight for custody, but also a battle within herself. Every day she was trying to find a way out, yet she didn't know when she would truly escape the shadows of her circumstances. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy and oppressive, as Emily felt an overwhelming sense of anxiety. After several rounds of heated debate, the judge finally made a ruling. Emily's heart raced, her eyes glimmering with hope as she awaited the verdict. She clenched her hands tightly, tension coursing through her. However, when the judge announced that John would receive primary custody of Megan, Emily's world seemed to collapse in an instant. It felt as though a heavy weight had struck her heart, and she was unable to bear such a devastating blow. Tears streamed down her face, and she struggled to regain her composure. The despair of losing custody washed over her like a tidal wave, leaving Emily feeling as if she had been pushed into an abyss. All her efforts and struggles in the courtroom evaporated in an instant. She envisioned Megan living with John, a wave of fear engulfing her. Emily couldn't help but wonder how this would affect Megan, whether she would feel safe and happy in her father's care. The worry for Megan's future made it difficult for Emily to breathe, and everything around her seemed to turn dull and lifeless. Walking out of the courtroom, Emily felt as if she had hit rock bottom. Her steps were heavy as she replayed the events of the trial in her mind. She felt angry, wronged, and utterly hopeless. Why had her sacrifices and efforts led to such a cruel outcome? Doubts began to creep in, and she found herself questioning her choices as if everything around her was blaming her. Even the once sweet memories began to taste bitter. As time passed, Emily's mental state worsened. She often found herself alone at home, unable to focus on work, her thoughts consumed by worries about Megan. Her emotions fluctuated wildly. Sometimes she was angry, sometimes sad, and often lonely. She tried to confide in friends, but no one seemed to truly understand her pain. The emptiness and despair inside her continued to gnaw away at her, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated. In this state of hopelessness, Emily's thoughts began to shift toward the extreme. She developed a deep-seated hatred for John. She imagined how wonderful her life would be without his interference, and how happy Megan would be if the divorce had never happened. Her mind became filled with vengeful thoughts, as if those ideas were the only way to salvage her spirit. As time went on, these extreme thoughts began to evolve into a concrete plan. Emily started to investigate John's life, closely monitoring his actions and habits. She quietly followed him, trying to gather details about his life. She understood that she needed to devise a meticulous plan to make John pay for everything he had done. Though fear and anxiety bubbled within her, a sense of strength quietly emerged from those emotions. Emily began to collect evidence, searching for vulnerabilities in John's life. She observed his interactions with Megan, documenting his behavior and attitude toward their daughter. She hoped to find something, anything, that she could use to challenge the court's ruling and regain custody. During this process, Emily found herself increasingly immersed in her vengeful plan, with despair and anger intertwining, solidifying her resolve. In her heart, revenge gradually became her only hope. She started to envision how to make John pay for his actions, even fantasizing about scenes where he lost everything. Each time she thought about Megan's safety, a surge of anger welled up inside her. She knew she had to take action and could no longer allow herself and her daughter to suffer. This thought dug deeper into her mind, becoming the focal point of her life. Thus Emily made the decision to make John feel her anger and despair. She understood that the path of revenge was fraught with risks and uncertainties, but she felt there was no turning back. The darkness and hopelessness within her clouded her vision for the future, yet they also helped her discover a newfound strength. The flames of revenge began to burn fiercely within her, gradually leading her towards an unpredictable fate. Emily's inner turmoil wrestled between despair and anger, ultimately leading to a more concrete revenge plan. After countless sleepless nights, she began to meticulously design how to make John pay for the pain he had caused her. She resolved to no longer be a passive victim, but to take control of her fate and deliver the punishment he deserved. Her plan revolved around using an animal tranquilizer, as she discovered that such drugs could be easily obtained from various veterinary clinics and pet stores. After several days of research, she learned that some veterinarians use this medication to help animals relax during surgeries or injections. A thought crossed Emily's mind. If she could use this tranquilizer, perhaps she could incapacitate John and create an opportunity to regain custody of Megan. Emily started seeking ways to obtain the tranquilizer. She contacted several veterinary clinics under the pretense of being a pet owner, asking if she could purchase the tranquilizer for her cat. To avoid raising suspicions, she prepared a fake identity and concocted stories related to pet care. However, after several attempts, she had no success. Veterinarians were very cautious about dispensing medication, requiring proof of legitimacy and a detailed usage plan, which left Emily feeling frustrated and helpless. Just as despair began to set in, Emily learned that a former colleague's husband was a veterinarian. She decided to leverage this connection to try and obtain the tranquilizer through him. After carefully planning for a few days, Emily arranged to meet with the veterinarian, pretending to seek advice on pet care. During their conversation, she cautiously mentioned needing some tranquilizers to help her cat relax. Although the veterinarian seemed somewhat skeptical after Emily's repeated requests, he eventually agreed to provide a small vial of the tranquilizer, insisting that she use it cautiously. With the tranquilizer in her possession, Emily's hatred and desire for revenge burned like a wildfire within her. She began drafting a detailed execution plan. She decided to invite John to spend a weekend outing with Megan, taking advantage of the situation to implement her scheme. She would mix the tranquilizer into John's drink, causing him to lose consciousness without realizing it. Then Emily would express to Megan just how much she cared about her safety, portraying John as an unreliable father. On the day of execution, Emily prepared everything meticulously. She dressed carefully, trying to appear relaxed and natural. She set up a small picnic and arranged to meet John at the park. The day was sunny, with blue skies and white clouds, creating a light and pleasant atmosphere. Emily repeatedly told herself that everything was for Megan's future. When she met John at the park, Emily worked hard to maintain her calm demeanor. John seemed surprised by her change in behavior, but didn't say much. They started chatting, and John's obvious concern for Megan reignited Emily's internal anger. She laid out a small picnic, pulling out the drinks she had prepared in advance, discreetly mixing in the tranquilizer. Her hands trembled slightly as anxiety coursed through her, but she forced herself to keep a steady expression. As time went on, Emily noticed John gradually finishing his drink, a flicker of unease passing through her. However, she reassured herself that everything was for Megan's sake. She patiently waited until John's demeanor began to change, becoming more dazed. Minutes later, John's body visibly relaxed, his gaze becoming unfocused, and ultimately, he slowly collapsed onto the picnic blanket, completely unconscious. This entire scene was captured by dashcam footage from passing cars. It was an ordinary weekend, and the park was filled with people enjoying their time, unaware of the looming danger. Bystanders noticed the odd behavior of Emily and John, beginning to murmur among themselves. A woman approached, attempting to wake John, but found he couldn't respond no matter how hard she tried. In a panic, she immediately dialed 911, seeking help. Meanwhile, a mix of complex emotions swirled within Emily. She had anticipated feeling a sense of relief, but instead she was hit by waves of unease and fear. Thoughts of Megan flooded her mind, and she reflected on everything she had done. As a crowd began to gather, Emily began to realize that her plan might be spiraling out of control. Her heart raced, and the sounds of sirens around her muddled her thoughts. Onlookers began capturing the unfolding drama on their phones, leaving Emily's actions exposed to the world. At that moment, the sirens and the blaring of emergency vehicles shattered the park's tranquility, filling Emily with anxiety and dread. She realized her plan was beyond recovery, and the flames of revenge were now uncontrollable. A strong wave of regret washed over her as she grappled with the reality that her pursuit of vengeance had led her to this unmanageable situation. When emergency personnel arrived, they quickly lifted John onto a stretcher, performing urgent care. Emily stood nearby, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty, unable to believe she had come this far. The bystanders murmured among themselves, their expressions filled with confusion and horror. A sense of foreboding crept into Emily's mind. She knew what consequences awaited her. As the police arrived and began to question the situation, Emily's mood darkened further. She understood that everything had been recorded and that she could not escape the legal repercussions of her actions. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of despair as the consequences of her revenge began to manifest. The trial unfolded like a prolonged drama, with Emily's fate hanging in the balance. As the proceedings began, the judge, jury, and public focused their attention on this highly publicized case. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, as the attorneys were fully prepared to advocate for their respective clients. The prosecution charged Emily with premeditated murder, arguing that her actions were a calculated act of revenge. In their opening statement, the prosecutor meticulously outlined the events of the case, emphasizing Emily's coldness and ruthlessness towards her ex-husband. They asserted that she had deliberately used the tranquilizer to harm John for her personal gain. The prosecution's evidence was clear and direct, including traces of the drug found by police shortly after the incident and detailed records of the custody dispute between Emily and John. They claimed that Emily's actions were not only an attack on her ex-husband, but also posed a significant threat to her daughter Megan's future. Emily's defense attorney countered, arguing that Emily did not intend to murder John, but acted out of despair and a strong protective instinct for her child. The defense contended that Emily, suffering from a mental breakdown after the divorce, had been trying to shield herself and her daughter from perceived harm posed by John. Her attorney suggested that Emily's actions stemmed from an extreme fear for her child's future, rather than a premeditated intent to kill. Throughout the trial, one of the most dramatic pieces of evidence was the dashcam footage from a nearby camera. This video captured the events of the day of the incident, clearly showing how Emily mixed the tranquilizer into John's drink and his subsequent loss of consciousness. When the footage was played in court, a heavy silence fell over the room. The expressions on the jurors' faces turned serious, clearly impacted by the disturbing images. The prosecution used this video to argue that Emily's crime was premeditated, while the defense attempted to explain that her actions were driven by emotional extremes. As evidence was presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. Emily sat in the defendant's chair, pale and anxious, with a look of despair in her eyes. Every time the prosecution presented their evidence, she felt a wave of unease wash over her. Her heart raced, as time seemed to stand still in that moment. Emily's defense attorney worked tirelessly to advocate for her, trying to utilize every possible argument to secure her freedom. Dramatic moments unfolded in the courtroom as well. A witness was called to testify who had seen Emily and John on the day of the incident. She broke down in tears while recounting the shocking events, expressing her dismay over the tragedy. Her emotional testimony evoked sympathy from several jurors, who seemed to grasp Emily's plight. However, as the trial progressed, the prosecution's evidence began to dominate. Whether it was the shocking images from the video or the expert analyses of the tranquilizer, everything pointed toward one conclusion: Emily's actions were intentional and carefully considered. Despite the defense's attempts to counter this narrative, doubts about Emily's guilt began to take root in the jury's minds. Ultimately, the trial entered the closing arguments phase. Both the prosecution and defense delivered their final statements. All eyes in the courtroom were on the judge as they awaited the final verdict, each person contemplating the deeper issues behind the tragedy: custody, revenge, familial bonds, and the law. After several hours of deliberation, the jury finally reached a consensus. The courtroom reconvened, and the judge prepared to announce the verdict. Emily, pale and gripping her hands tightly, awaited the decision. The jury's ruling came like a thunderclap, declaring her guilty. The judge's voice echoed in the courtroom, and Emily's heart sank along with her hopes. This verdict was not just a legal outcome, it was a summary of the entire tragedy. Emily's plan for revenge ultimately evaporated, leaving behind only regret and endless worry for her daughter's future. In the courtroom, her fate was already sealed, and the ramifications of this decision would profoundly impact not only her life and Megan's, but also society as a whole. As the dust settled on Emily's tragic case, it became a somber reminder of the complexities and dangers inherent in custody disputes. The fierce battle over parental rights had spiraled into a heartbreaking tale of revenge, leaving behind a trail of destruction and loss. This incident underscored the profound impact such conflicts can have on the lives of everyone involved, especially innocent children like Megan, caught in the crossfire of their parents' animosities. Reflecting on Emily's mental state, one cannot help but acknowledge the darker aspects of human nature that emerged in this case. The desperation and pain she felt pushed her to a point of no return, highlighting how unresolved emotions can manifest in extreme actions. Her story serves as a cautionary tale, revealing how love can devolve into obsession and vengeance when communication breaks down. It is a stark illustration of how the pressures of divorce and custody battles can warp one's judgment, leading to irrevocable consequences. For the audience, this tragedy is a call to action, to advocate for rational discourse and open communication when faced with family disputes. It is vital to seek solutions that prioritize the well-being of children and foster understanding rather than allowing conflicts to escalate into harmful confrontations. By recognizing the potential dangers that lie within family struggles, individuals can work towards resolving differences in a more constructive manner, ensuring that no child has to endure the fallout of a parental war.